Thank you for joining us for today's Ipsos Know the New America webinar with a focus on improving the user experience for citizens needing to access government services digitally. Throughout today's session, you will remain in listen-only mode. However, throughout the webinar, please submit your questions online using the Q&A feature. Time permitting, we'll answer questions at the end of today's session. However, if time runs short, then your question will be answered by email. Today's webinar is also being recorded and will be directly emailed to you. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's first speaker, Kelly Bell, Senior Vice President of Ipsos Public Sector Research. Kelly, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. And good morning, everyone. I'm excited to get to talk about this important topic with you all. So I'm going to start with a overview of our agenda and why we are all here. So we have a jam-packed agenda for you. We are going to start by talking about the value of UX in government services, and I have some data and insights to share on the impact of good UX and how that improves services. Then my colleague Peter is going to talk about what you can do to improve your UX and share some findings from UX testing that his team led for looking at different government sites. And then we'll close up talking about the importance of accessibility in digital experiences, how accessibility leads to better experiences for all, and what it takes to become an accessibility first organization. So getting started right off with, I think, the topic that can unite us all, the value of UX in government services. So why is it important to think about UX, user experience, when we're talking about public sector government services? Here, I think it's always important, but even more so in the current time when we are hearing all about government efficiency, being efficient and effective with the taxpayer funding. UX is a secret weapon, a important strategy that can help us design more effective and efficient government services. So when we have good UX in our digital services and the ways people interact with the government, what we see from that is efficient self-service. People are able to answer their own questions, find the services they need rather than needing to call a call center or show up to an office. And as we all know, that's a more effective and efficient use of our resources. It can streamline the experience. When people have a good streamlined experience with government, they're able to, submit a tax return and enter information in all the right fields and check all the right boxes they need to. We're seeing less errors, less processing time, less need for human manual review and corrections. When we have intuitive navigation on sites, making it easy for people to find the information and services they need, they're coming away from that with a better feeling about the information they were looking for, a better feeling about the government agency that they were interacting with. And then when we make it accessible, when we're incorporating accessibility from the start, we're actually improving access for everyone, those with disabilities and everyone else, and we're seeing better design and outcomes. I have some what I think are really important data points to share from the private sector and what we've seen in our UX work. So 51% of people have stopped using a website because it was too confusing. Almost 90% say they've switched companies, switched providers due to a poor online experience. 52% say that bad mobile experiences make them less likely to engage with a company in the future. And the data we have from working in the private sector shows that for every $1 invested in UX, we see a $100 return on investment. So, taking these lessons from the private sector, that user experience, user interface is incredibly important to keeping your customers, retaining them, and investments early have massive return. That applies I think, directly to public sector when we're talking about efficiency, improving experiences, and also making sure that we get people to do things that we need them to do, like file tax returns. The easier and more streamlined we make it, the more likely we are to see people follow through with that. I think this is another really striking statistic to highlight. So in 2020, there were 218 billion app downloads across the Google and Apple app stores. Only 25% of those apps were used more than once. So that's a huge waste of time and money if, you know, if we're investing resources into developing an app, designing an app, launching an app, and people are downloading it. So they're showing there's demand, showing there's a need for it, and then they open it, they use it, and that experience doesn't live up to expectations, and they're not bothering to go back. So we really want to make sure that we are designing experiences so that they meet the needs people have and they are able to use them. I think for most people on this call, the story of healthcare.gov will not be anything new. I think this is kind of an origin story for a lot of the way we talk about UX, user experience, and digital services in government today. So we all know kind of the top line story that healthcare.gov had a number of issues when it was launched. The striking stat I noted down was on the first day that it was launched, there were 4 million unique users who visited the site, but only 6 of them successfully registered. So that's a pretty low percentage success rate. There were numerous UX challenges that have been, you know, described and reported on and dissected related to navigational issues, process problems, learnability issues, responsiveness, people being able to figure out what they needed to do and get it done. I don't want to dwell on that so much as what came next, because healthcare.gov isn't just a cautionary tale, but it's also a success story. So the administration brought in private sector experts in software design and user experience, and user testing, digital services to help turn around the healthcare.gov site to make the experience better, more easily navigable, more user-friendly. And those experts managed to turn it around. They also ultimately went on to create the US Digital Service and kick off what became a government-wide focus on digital transformation. And a lot of, you know, what we talk about in the public sector digital space now stems from those early days and lessons learned. So we hear so much more, and I think it's become kind of universally accepted that we need cross-functional teams and agile development. We need continuous user testing. We need early research. We need iterative design, and we need to, you know, bring in technical expertise when we're launching new services. This chart that I have in front of us is actually from the World Bank's report on digital and e-government. I think it's really helpful as we're kind of positioning ourselves of where we are in the transformation towards digital and gov tech. And I think in the US, the vast majority of agencies, state, local, federal, have moved on from analog, have transitioned into that e-government stage. And some, you know, are leading the way into digital government, into gov tech. The difference as we move through these phases, as we move towards the digital government, the gov tech, is really when we're starting to see the user involvement, the user-centered focus, the digital integration through all aspects of what we're doing. And it's also when we're seeing that digital services, e-government services aren't just add-ons. They're not just things that, you know, we have a standard process and now we're building a way to do it online, but it's actually core to how we're designing our services. And we're starting from a place of assuming that people will want to access digitally and designing around those needs. This ultimately leads us towards kind of that end stage of gov tech, where we see citizen-centric public services that are universally accessible. Everybody can access them in the way they want, and that's online and offline. When we have a whole of government approach, a shared vision for using digital platforms and data, and then ultimately leading to increased civic engagement through the ability to use civic tech. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Peter now to talk about what you can do to embrace this and see these changes in your organization.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. So as you think about what you can do, there's really 4 different paths that one could go down, whether in the public sector or the private sector. And I'm just going to briefly talk about this. You could choose to run an audit, which is typically the starting point of any engagement. And in that case, you are comparing your experience versus the experience of your peers. But it's also important to look at best-in-class performers in the digital space, because as we all know, with the increased digitization of everything, you're being compared not just to similar experiences in your sector, but to all of the digital experiences that a user, a consumer, a citizen is exposed to over time. So conducting an audit, understanding where you stand, and also identifying some of the things that could inform phase 2, which is what we refer to as fix. And this is quite simply identifying those early wins, the quick wins that you could prioritize and address relatively easily, and remove some pretty significant barriers and issues, and get yourself into a better standing from a UX standpoint. You could choose to go one step further and look at the total journey, beginning with understanding the user needs and how you could optimize your journey against those needs. And lastly, you could embrace a more transformative approach, which is really starting from scratch, based on the understanding of the user needs. What is a totally new experience that you could build based on those user needs without concern for what exists today? So as we think about this, I am going to talk about really paths 1 and 2 in the next few slides. And this is referring to a framework that we've developed called the UX score, where we've looked at 156 different websites and apps across 17 sectors, private and public, and among 2,500 participants all told. And we've been able to identify best practices across the continuum of all the different sectors, but within specific sectors. And on the next slide, what I am here to talk to you about is the 5 factors that we use to evaluate a user experience. And I'll just run through these real quickly. Operability, number 1, is quite simply, does the app work well? Does it function? Is it usable? The second is learnability. Is it easy to understand and easy to learn? Second is product fit. Does it have what I need? Does it provide me with the features and functions that I'm looking for and the tasks that I want to accomplish? Fourth is inspiration. Does it inspire me to want to come back and use the site more, or does it elevate my feelings about the sponsor of the site? And then lastly is design appeal. Does it look good? Is it pleasing to the eye? And we've proven that if you optimize your user experience against those 5 factors, you achieve a higher net promoter score. You're more likely to use the site or app to begin with, more likely to return to the site if you have already used it, and ultimately it has a positive impact on the brand equity of the sponsor. So what we've done then is taken those 5 factors and coalesced them around 3 different dimensions, and I'm going to report some data based on these dimensions. That they are usability, relevance, and design appeal. Usability is simply a combination of operability and learnability. Relevance is a combination of product fit and inspiration, and design appeal sits on its own. So for the purposes of this discussion, we looked at municipal sites. So we think that municipal sites are a good proxy for the kind of experience that one typically comes across in a public sector digital experience, in that they are more times than not very comprehensive. They've got centralized platforms where there's lots of different information. users are trying to both get information as well as perform certain tasks and engage in different activities on the site. So, so municipal sites, again, I think represent kind of a a stand-in for what are the typical experiences that one would look for in a broader government site, whether it's federal, local, or municipal. And in this case, we looked at 4 cities. We looked at Reno, Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. And I can share with you some of the findings from this, because I think while it may not be directly relevant to you and your world, I think there are still lessons to be learned that could be applied no matter where you are in the government space. So first, what we did, it was a 30-minute remote unmoderated session using a Think Aloud protocol. We had them complete 6 different tasks and reported their success of achieving those tasks and then answering the UX score battery of questions. And for each site, we tried to achieve at least a sample size of 30. And we also got not only their numerical responses to the metrics, but we used a camera picture-in-picture so that you could also see the experience as they were experiencing it and hear their description of their experience as they were going through it. So the tasks that we gave them to complete, one was quite simply find information about a bus schedule. Second was information about service disruptions on the website. Third was find a park or trail near you. Fourth was registering for a sports league or a class. Fifth was finding information on garbage collection. And then the last one was information about a job application process on the website. So all participants went through all 6 tasks that were all present on all of the sites. So I'll share with you just a couple of the top line findings. First of all, maybe not surprisingly, the municipal websites did perform on the lower end of the spectrum of all of the sites tested. They did underperform most industries. You can see here that Philadelphia was in fact the best performing site, both in terms of the individual UX score components, but also overall. And they achieved a pretty significant score on design appeal, frankly. That was one of the higher across multiple sectors. You can see here that relevance was the category that the sites tended to score the lowest on. Excuse me. This is a finding that we find holds true across multiple sectors. And if you remember back, this is made up of, does it have the features and functions that I need, and does it inspire me about the sponsor or make me want to come back and use it again? And you can see that too, even for this sector, was where most of the sites fell short. So I'm going to drill down just a little bit deeper on the next slide. And you can see here that when we compare the municipal sites versus other sites in that same underperforming category, there's some similarities to them. They all are information rich. They all have multiple potential tasks that people are trying to accomplish. They are more complex than not. So it's not surprising that municipal sites kind of hung out with this crowd, in that they're similar in their nature. And on the next slide, just a little bit more on what we found the specific issues were leading to those scores. From a usability standpoint, the sites were just really complex. There were a complex navigation process that obstructed people's paths through the site and their efforts to get critical information. The search function was inconsistent and results were frustrating. They lacked an ability to backtrack through the experience, and they would tend to get lost, not knowing where they were in terms of the totality of their journey. And then users face disruptions due to inconsistency in displaying maps in a different way and using unclear labels and unnoticed sections. So some of the sections were difficult to find. So the findability was hard, and then just simply broken links. So a lot of usability fixes could have gone a long way to improving the experiences. So when we think about relevance, there really was one issue that stood out most. Again, this is related to having the features that I want, because all of these sites tended to link off the site to external sites for some common practices or some common tasks to get done. And that interrupted the flow and made it confusing to where they were in the process and how to get back to where they wanted to be. And then lastly, design appeal, it relates to the complex nature of it. They just were cluttered, overstuffed, more complex than they needed to be. And they also used language that was unclear or potentially misleading. So all of these things, again, while they are relevant to this group of sites, they are lessons that I think you could take away to any user experience as ways to optimize it. So recommendations, quite simply, were in lockstep with those findings. Optimize your use of icons and links, simplify the navigation process, improve the search functions, reliability, ensure that links are functional. It's like problem number one if the links aren't working. And then integrate the essential external information on the site in a way that doesn't, distill it down too much, and you don't miss the information that's important, but find a way to bring some of that content to the site itself, and then consider more streamlined design, but that also doesn't compromise the overall experience. So hopefully that gives you just some initial thoughts on what could be done to improve user experience in this space. And as Kelly mentioned at the outset, accessibility is key, no matter what sector you're in, but it's particularly important when it comes to public sector, because government services should be made available to every citizen, not just citizens that have access. So it's really important as you think about your UX that from the beginning you're thinking about how people with disabilities can access the service. So Kelly's just going to take it from here and talk a little bit more about that same subject.
Thanks. And yes, as I mentioned, and as we say all the time at Ipsos, accessible UX is good UX. So definitely can't have a session about improving UX in the public sector without talking about accessibility. So just starting with some ground setting, why do we need to make digital services accessible? Well, number one, it's the right thing to do, as Peter mentioned, especially when it comes to public sector, whether it's state, local, federal, these are services not just targeting, your core consumers, but really they're services for a population and need to be accessible to the full population. But beyond that, beyond it just being the right thing to do, there are benefits to making things accessible. When you have accessible, easily navigable, easily usable websites and interactions, you are building public trust and positive reputation for everybody that's interacting with those services. We're seeing efficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, and improving that service delivery. We know that there's a lot of regulation and requirements for accessibility, especially in the public sector. So getting ahead of that and avoiding having to slow down, redo, rework, go to court if we're incorporating it from the beginning. And then you're driving innovation and benefits for user experiences for everyone. And this is what we call the curb cut effect. So the curb cut effect is a phenomenon where a modification made to an existing structure or technology that's intended to accommodate people with disabilities becomes appreciated for its benefits to all. And it's called the curb cut effect because if you think about walking down the sidewalk in any city or neighborhood, when you're crossing a street, you're coming up on curb cuts. Entries into the sidewalks that you don't have to go over a curb. And initially, curb cuts were added to accommodate people with disabilities who may be using wheelchairs or mobility aids. But the benefits of curb cuts and the people that use curb cuts are not limited to people with disabilities. It's, you know, as a mom pushing a stroller around, I rely on those curb cuts. Bikers use the curb cuts. Anybody who's wheeling a shopping cart or wheeling a heavy suitcase is thankful to have those curb cuts. So we see those benefits extend and create a better experience for everyone. And I have some data, hot off the presses data that we actually ran some questions on Ipsos Knowledge Panel last week, which is our probability-based online panel that's representative of the US population. So we surveyed US adults, not specifically people with disabilities, just general US population, to understand how often people are using features that were originally designed to be accessibility features in their digital services. So things like subtitles and captions, magnification, speech to text, text to speech, and audio descriptions. And you can see the data here that these services are used very frequently. So subtitles and captions, 65% of Americans said that they use them sometimes or most or all of the time. Magnification, 63%. We see the numbers drop a little, but these are still really big chunks when you think about the US population of how many people this really is. If 42% are using speech to text, if 27% are using text to speech, and 23% are using audio descriptions. We also included open-end question asking people, you know, why they use the services. And so I just highlighted a few quotes here that show that these really are things that are viewed as beneficial, helpful, kind of convenience, value add for everyone. So we've got a quote saying that using captions makes it so much easier to follow along, especially if there's different accents, or if you have a different quality of TV speakers, it's a better consistent experience to turn on those captions. There's also a quote about speech to text and how it's helpful to be hands-free, or if you're texting a huge paragraph to someone, it just saves time to be able to speak it out loud. So these are features designed for accessibility, but that are having benefits beyond that. And now I'm going to hand it back to Peter to talk about what it takes to become an accessibility first organization.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
Did I hand it back too soon? I just totally looked at the next slide and I was like, that's still me. Yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll go away. It's all yours.
The benefit of being live, guys. This is how you know we really are live today. So submit your questions and we'll be able to answer them live. So what does it take to become an accessibility first organization? To do this, what we say all the time at Ipsos, kind of our motto, good UX, accessible UX is good UX. And the way we get there is by shifting left. And, you know, I'm sitting in DC, so I want to clarify, I don't mean shifting left politically. Where shifting left is referring to, if you think about a timeline, you know, the way we usually draw it out of, you know, start to finish, left to right. Shifting left is moving earlier in that timeline. Anything we can do to move user testing and accessibility concerns earlier in that timeline is going to have benefits in terms of saving time, saving effort, and leading to better products. So the phrase shift left originates from software development and IT fields, and it refers to moving tasks or activities traditionally later, things like quality control, user testing, bug reports, moving those earlier in the cycle. And there's a lot of benefits to shifting left, and the benefits to shifting left are the same whether we're talking about software development or we're talking about accessible UX. But it's really like faster detection of issues, being able to identify bugs, security vulnerabilities, accessibility barriers before they become baked into the technology and when they're easier to fix. It's cost efficient. The earlier you do things, the easier it is, the quicker it is, the more cost efficient it is to fix them. It's leading to better quality. You're not ending up launching healthcare.gov to, you know, billions of people and getting only 6 registrants and having a lot of news stories, but you're catching those issues earlier and leading to a better product when you are able to launch and release. And it's it allows you to be more agile. Like the sooner and earlier in your process that you are identifying and testing things, the easier it is to shift. It also means you're going to be more used to shifting and adapting, so that when there are environmental forces or things outside your control requiring that, you'll be able to adapt as well. And I think this quote really sums it up, so I just love it. And the quote is, "You can't put blueberries in the muffin after the muffin is baked." So if you are wanting a blueberry muffin this weekend, you really need to think about that. You know, when you head to the grocery store, and make sure you buy blueberries. And when you're mixing that batter, when you make sure to remember to add the blueberries in, because you're not going to enjoy your blueberry muffin very much if you forget the blueberries and then have to try to figure out how you add them in after. And now for real, I will hand it over to Peter to talk about how we make research more accessible.
All right. Thanks. We're a research agency, so of course I'm going to talk about the elements of research that can be impacted by involving people with disabilities, but also I'm sure some of you are also in the research business. So here we are to talk about impact on research. And on the next slide, we have some basic guiding principles. If you could advance the slide, please. There we go. Thank you. When it comes to thinking about research among people with disabilities. And the first one is a saying that's very prominent in the community, and that is nothing about us without us, which simply means that people with disabilities want to be involved throughout the process, throughout the research process. They want to be consulted. They want to be sure that they are doing everything they can to improve the outcomes and improve the lives of others in their community. So it's really important to keep that in mind as you structure your research. Involvement is key. Start from the start, which is really a build off of shift left, in that the earlier that you begin and involve them in the process, the better off you will be. And third is embracing complexity. Involving people with disabilities is not always an easy task. There are things that you need to think about in terms of how it will add complexity, both in terms of time as well as tasks and function throughout that process, because it never goes smoothly. And then the last is purpose and pragmatism, which simply relates to the point of learning and iterating as you go. You're not going to get it right the first time, but you will learn and you will make it better and you will try again. And there's no problem. There's many examples that we have where simply the act of trying to involve them in the process, even though it may not go perfectly well, is a win. And then on the next slide, we translate these principles into research ground rules. And the first is just inclusive but sensitive recruiting. If there's one thing that's important, it's about making sure that you have access to the right people at the right time. And it's not an easy audience to recruit for, but what we have found is that if you connect to local organizations and advocacy groups that very much want to participate, they are happy to share their membership. Their membership asks to be involved in projects like this or programs like this. But if you involve those local organizations, you're more than likely to be successful. It's a lot easier than trying to find people with disabilities in a general population panel or sample source. So involve the communities. And then the second is to be sensitive in the recruiting process. It's important that you think about the language that you use and how you refer to people with disabilities. In some cases, you need to leave it open-ended and give them an opportunity to self-identify, because they don't always identify the way that you do. People have multiple disabilities that they're dealing with at one time, and so their self-identification is important to allow for. Second is participant partnering. I mentioned this as one of the ground rules, and I'm sorry, one of the guiding principles, and that's that they really want to be involved, and it's important to involve them throughout the entire process. Share the discussion guide or the survey with them. Ask them whether you're asking the right questions or getting at the right issues. Share the output with them after the fact, and also allow them to have input into that analysis. They very much want to partner with you on the process. Third is truthful scoping. As I mentioned, it's complex. It's sometimes, many times you'll go over time. You have to allow for their assistive technology and the fact that it won't always go right. So it's important to build time into the schedule, allow for buffers, don't overstuff the number of sessions that you're trying to accomplish in a day, because they no doubt will go beyond what you had planned. And then the last is commitment to community. Again, really important to give opportunity, to provide opportunities to give back to the community, and sort of address their desire to be participants in the process, and making sure that you and they are doing everything they can to improve the lives of others in their community. So those are just some basic ground rules. We have lots more detail behind all of these that we'd be happy to share with you after the fact. So some key takeaways from our discussion now as we wrap up. First is that there's no doubt that the rapid transformation to digital government is increasing the importance of UX. We're seeing this every day, and I'm sure we all have experienced it ourselves. And there is a pretty significant lesson from the past that we could all draw upon as we think about this. The second is a quick and easy way to start is just to audit your efforts via some sort of benchmarking framework like the one that I presented. You could also do an expert review by a designer who can walk through the experience using a heuristic analysis or heuristic framework and come up with some opportunities for some quick fixes. Second is, the third is to including people with disabilities in your efforts improves the overall experience for everyone. You probably heard Kelly say that a few times. I'll say it again. It's absolutely true. The fourth is bringing in people with disabilities earlier in the discovery process will save time and money. You're not putting the blueberries back in the muffin. And then lastly, incorporating people with disabilities into your research process can be a challenge, but with practice and a thoughtful approach can also be incredibly rewarding in many, many ways. So that is it for our presentation today. We actually have a few minutes left for some questions. If you have any, we'd be happy to take them.
Do you see any questions coming in, Peter?
Yes, hang on one second. Let me grab it. All right. The UX score framework differs from other frameworks. Can you tell us how specifically? I think the primary difference is that the UX score framework looks at the total experience, not just usability. Most of the other frameworks really are measuring usability aspects. We look at usability, yes, it's incredibly important, but it's also important to look at, as I mentioned in looking at the municipal sites, the impact that just having the right feature set has on the experience. Like, it doesn't matter how usable it is if you aren't providing them with the right tools that they need to get the job done. So that's why we incorporate relevance. It's also important to think about what causes people to walk away with a smile on their face, having been inspired by that experience. And so we look at that, and then also design appeal. And we just fundamentally believe that you need to look at that total experience and not just the singular aspect of usability in order to achieve digital success.
Yeah, and just adding on that, I think one of the big benefits that I love about the UX score is the benchmarking ability, just the efforts your team has gone to, Peter, to test and kind of use this standardized framework across so many different industries and sectors makes it really helpful to contextualize those results like we saw for the municipal sites.
Okay. There's another question here about what metrics should government agencies track to measure the impact of their UX improvements? I can start off with that one, Kelly, if you want. I think the answer is it depends. It depends on what the objectives of that experience are. If it's a transactional experience, such as completing a form or uploading something, then success would be more looking at the actual number of completions. Have you increased the success rate? Are there fewer errors? Are there fewer calls to a call center or a hotline? If it's an experience devoted to disseminating information, you might look at things such as time on task or successful navigation against some pre-identified happy path. I guess the bottom line is that because it's all about behavior, that you would want to measure the changes that you've made and have they enhanced or detracted from the behavior you intended. Yeah, I think that would be sort of the simplest answer.
Love that. I want to also just chime in a laddering up approach. If you think about kind of what metrics should we be tracking overall to show the value of our UX program, our CX program, these investments we're making, I think that's such a good question for public sector, especially because a lot of the standard metrics that we use in the private sector, things like net promoter score, or even just customer satisfaction, don't always make sense, right? Like you're not necessarily walking away from filing your tax return with the IRS, feeling highly satisfied with the IRS, or that you are likely to recommend the IRS to your friends. But that doesn't mean that it was a bad user experience or a bad customer experience. So I think figuring out like what those metrics that are really reflecting, I think, ease of doing business, like ability to do what I needed to do, like the process worked efficiently. I was able to navigate barriers or challenges. I understood the process. Those types of things can be really valuable to add in, either in addition or instead of something like a overall satisfaction score.
Okay, and I think we have time for one last question. You mentioned several good practices in accessibility research. Since we are new to this, what is the one issue you think is most important to keep in mind? I think would be that element of inclusive recruiting, or just recruiting in general. It is, no research will be successful if you don't have access to the right people at the right time. And it's not easy. It's not easy to recruit people with disabilities. So I think if you aren't mastering that upfront recruitment process, then you won't be successful down the road.
Yeah. And then I would add, especially if it's something you're brand new to, like just any little bit of effort is gonna have returns and it's worth it. So it might not be that you add this whole phase of accessibility research focused on people with disabilities, but even just add recruiting, 2 to 3 people with disabilities as part of your regular testing phase, or, nothing about us without us, like having a couple representatives from the community, people that are, familiar with the issues and experiencing accessibility barriers in other circumstances, look at kind of the language you're using, the tools you're using, and provide their feedback is going to have benefits. And then you just start building, and it's incremental, like you don't have to be perfect, as Peter said. don't make perfect the enemy of the good. I think taking small steps is how we get to the final outcome where we're designing with accessibility from the start. But you just got to start taking those small steps and building the support. And ultimately, I'm a big believer that doing this stuff, it has so many returns, and it really is how you get the most value from your investment, and it's going to make your products and services better. So if you start doing it in little ways, I think you're going to see the benefits, and it's going to make it really easy to build that case for doing it more intentionally and at a larger scale.
Okay, and there's just one more quick question here. That's a neat survey and results. Will that be shared as part of the follow-up? Yes, I should have mentioned that. I'd be happy to share the results from the municipal website test. We can make that part of the package, and there will also be a recording available of this webinar that you can access after. I think that's it. I think that's all we have time to show you and talk to you about today. I'll hand it back to Ellen now.
Well, I want to thank both you, Peter, and Kelly for today's amazing discussion. Really appreciate the questions we got today. In the meantime, as Peter said, be on the lookout for a link to today's recorded presentation. That won't happen for about a day or two, but you will receive an email with a direct link. Of course, in the meantime, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you, so please feel free to reach out to us directly. That now concludes today's amazing webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.